Hey everybody, happy Sunday. Finally getting outside after some brutal months, to be honest with you. Georgia, shocking, has been hotter. It's almost like our climate is heating up. I was going to drink some Bullet tonight. Thanks everybody for showing up, but an old student of mine, a kid named Danny, really good writer, going to graduate school. Congratulations. Danny brought me a bottle of, he got it personalized when he was over in Europe back when you could do those things. So best of luck, Danny, and best of luck to the rest of us. Happy to be doing this tonight. Happy to be with you all, of course. Last few weeks have been a lot. Absolute lot. Oh, that's very good. Very good. It's been a trying couple of weeks, is what I would say. And that's for a multitude of reasons. And what I would say before we begin with the questions and the conversation tonight, I try and maintain positivity even while I'm documenting some of the pretty rough things that we're dealing with right now, and some of, my God, how many crises do we have going on? I think we are living in a moment where a lot of the crises that we had been told about, I'd been told about climate change since I was a kid. Weirdly enough, and I think about this a lot recently, I had been talked to about how there might be some sort of a political crisis once the demographics start to shift in the country. And we are dealing with that. We're dealing with decisions that were made decades ago. And we are watching all of these things grow worse and worse with every single day. I want to say first and foremost to anybody who is watching from Louisiana or the Gulf states, please be careful. I'm sorry that it has become a regular occurrence to have to deal with these super hurricanes. On top of that, we have a question tonight from somebody in California who is dealing with a massive wildfire. Meanwhile, things are getting more and more dangerous. American empire is starting to fall apart. Meanwhile, our media, which we have to talk about on here tonight, has just completely gotten behind the cause of revitalization of empire, which has its own level of danger that we might be facing down. And of course, the Republican Party is spending almost every moment of its waking life right now calling for authoritarianism, calling for the overthrow of liberal democracy, of Caesarism, you name it. And I want to say that these are all serious things. I want to say that we are living in a moment of crisis. But before we get going with this, I will say that I am emboldened by the fact that so many people are growing more and more aware of the shakiness of the illusion that kept people from worrying about this stuff. I think that we have been sleepwalking for a while. I think that when American empire was growing, maybe when the economy felt better in between the myriad of crises and meltdowns, and maybe when these ecological disasters and natural disasters were few and far between, or at least further in between, I think that there were moments where people could get lost in their own experiences, in their own realities, in their own consumerism, in their own bubbles. And I feel like we are living in this moment in a time of awakening. That's good. It doesn't mean that there isn't going to be a myriad of tragedies. We're dealing with a lot of tragic stuff right now. And it takes an emotional and personal toll. I cannot tell you how many people I've heard from in the past couple of weeks who are struggling. And I want to say to anybody right now who is struggling that my heart goes out to you. And I hope that you find peace and direction. But I also want to say that I do have hope in this, that there is going to be a resolution in the near future because of what we are going through and how obvious these things are becoming. To deny these crises is to live in delusion at this point, willful delusion. We've been watching people left and right who make just an absolute shit ton of money from peddling this sort of delusional idea to people. And they do it in order to push empire, in order to push domination, in order to push economic exploitation. And I think that it's becoming more and more obvious with every single day what that is, and what these people are up to and how they conduct themselves. I have been repulsed over the past couple of weeks that, again, the media has completely gone in the other direction of what the public wants. And they're making it very obvious that they want these forever wars to go on for forever because it means power, because it means profit, because it means prestige. And I talked about this a couple of weeks ago on my last Bourbon talk, how there is this really dangerous idea that Americans have been operating on, that we should control the world and that we should dominate the world and that we should direct the trajectory of the world. And that's all fine and good, I guess, when you're rich and you're powerful and you have, this elite position or soapbox. And for the rest of us who we're either suffering, we're either looking at the possibility of being evicted after what the Supreme Court just did, or, we're one paycheck away from being destroyed, or if we get COVID, we might end up either dying or being wiped out financially. And meanwhile, we're living in this bizarre world where we're being lied to every single day about the reality that we're experiencing. We know better. We know better. And that veneer, that illusion, is evaporating because there's no hiding behind it anymore. We know what's happening with COVID. We know what's happening with the environment. The Republican Party isn't even hiding who they are anymore. They're telling you straight out that they don't want democracy and that they're interested in authoritarianism. There's no veneer anymore, besides a very, very thin, fragile one that is falling apart. And we're sitting here talking tonight, of course, Sunday, August 29th, as New Orleans is being hit by another super hurricane. And who's suffering? It's the poor, it's the vulnerable, it's people of color. And we know that. Meanwhile, who's suffering out west? Everybody who lives out west, because we are having a major ecological collapse that no one's going to run away from. It's going to affect all of us. We're already being affected by it, but it's going to get worse unless we take actual action. And what I will say is this. I think that all of this and this experience right now, that is, it hurts us, it traumatizes us, it knocks us down, it's going to scar us, and there's more to come. But I think that we're going to make it through, and I think that we're going to make different choices because of it. Because it's not deniable anymore. We know that. It's not deniable anymore. You can't just push it off. It's in a terminal stage. Everything from the neoliberal hypercapitalistic project to capitalism itself, to this just sham of a representative government that we deal with, to this illusion that we can continue to consume and poison the environment and just continue to consume and consume and consume and be told by, these corporations that depend on constant growth that, nothing's going on. Just go shopping. It'll be fine. We know better. We're well aware at this point. It's at a terminal stage. And for all of those reasons and more, because I believe in people, and history tells me that there is a certain level that we reach, a certain level where we get bullshitted just enough, where we reject it. And I think we're getting there. I truly do. I think we're getting there. The conversations that I'm hearing, the conversations that I'm having, the discourse that I've been privy to and have witnessed, people are starting to piece together things. And I keep saying on these live streams, I keep saying on the Muckrake podcast, I keep saying in interviews, that what we're watching with the right, what we're watching with corporations, what we're watching in all of these situations, are we're watching the people who are wealthy and powerful begin to panic. And the reason that they're panicking is because we're starting to piece things together. We're starting to add 1 + 1 and finding that it makes 2. That's not in their best interest. Their best interest is to continue to perpetuate this mythology of American exceptionalism and the mythology of a meritocracy. And I think in this, that we are coming to the point where that crisis is going to continue to announce itself more and more every single day. The question is what happens from that crisis? What do we do? How do we meet it? And what I'll say before we begin the questions tonight, because we have a plethora of things to discuss. The only thing that we can do is we can make ourselves better in order to prepare for something in the future. We can start to reach out to others, rebuild our relationships and our communities. We can try and be prepared for where we're going and what's to come. Because the only thing that I can tell you with absolute certainty is that this status quo bias, this idea that tomorrow is going to look like today or next year is going to look like today, it's absolutely impossible. We're done. That's over. And either we're going to have to revolutionize almost literally everything, because we're not going to solve climate change. We're not going to solve this political crisis, logjam, whatever you want to call it. And we're not going to solve rising authoritarianism or growing inequality. We're not going to solve that by staying stagnant. And what's more, whether or not we are prepared for the moment is coming. The only thing that we can do is start to deal with our own priorities, our own thoughts, our own selves, to get to know ourselves better, to get to know the people around us better, and prepare for what's coming. But I think we're going to, and I have hope. But I also would be lying if I didn't say that the past couple of weeks have been a kick in the ass. They've been hard. The past month has been hard. The past couple of years have been hard. So we have to admit where things are hard. We have to admit when we struggle. We have to admit what is actually happening. But we also have to continue to work towards the future. And it's one of those situations where I think giving up all hope, I think embracing a negative nihilism. Yeah. So Jacob said, why is it that whenever an anti-fascist clash with fascist, it's never mentioned that the fascists are invaders? The whole point of that is because the fascist or the right wingers are treated as if that is what America is. We're supposed to believe that that is what actual America is, and that anything that's anti-fascist, anything that's leftist, anything that is reformist, anything that is socialist, any of these other ideas, that these are somehow or another variables. They're not straight up American, right? Which, by the way, is what you're going to hear a lot over the next few weeks and months with a bunch of Afghan refugees coming to America. There's going to be a lot of talk about what America is and what it isn't, which is bullshit. America is a social construct. It's a country that was made up and imbued with all kinds of espoused principles that it has never lived up to. Now, America is special because it has those espoused principles, and if we work towards them, maybe someday we can realize liberty, freedom, and equality. We've just never gotten there. But those far-right people, the paramilitary groups, the fascists, the terrorists, the separatists, all of that, that is considered regular America because it helps everything else. It helps America continue to dominate and oppress and also to exploit. This is one of those things where when you look through history and you start finding these street battles, when you start finding that like a group isn't afraid to pull out a gun and just pop off a few rounds at each other and or bloody people in the street, and they're not afraid of law enforcement, and law enforcement says, you know what, you go ahead and take care of yourself. It's a bad situation. And we can't live in denial of it. It's only going to get worse as these other crises that we're getting ready to talk about exacerbate. Absolutely, the Overton window has been dragged. We've been doing this. I was thinking about this the other day, how long we've been doing this Bourbon Talk thing. Every other Sunday or every Sunday or whatever. And I want to say that it started at the beginning of the pandemic. That sounds about right. I want to say that it was about 1.5 years ago that we started doing this thing. And you know, if you go back and you watch those old videos in the beginning of Bourbon Talk, the things that we would talk about have not only come true, we've now gone steps beyond them. And it's simply because this is what happens. It just continues to go on and on and on. So the Overton window, somebody asked about it. The Overton window is this idea of what is normal, what is acceptable in the world, right? So like, for instance, you know, right now it's totally acceptable to have these paramilitary far-right groups in the street firing at people, beating people. A couple of years ago, that wasn't. So like, I was thinking about this the other day when I started reporting on Trump rallies back in 2015, 2016. I saw all these people at the rallies. I saw them engaging in like these verbal battles and intimidation and telling leftists and protesters that they wanted to beat them and attack them. But back then, you weren't going to get away with that. There were a couple of smattering of moments. There was one in Chicago. I'll never forget when that happened. And it was like when it started to boil over. And now it's just something that happens and it barely gets brought up on the news at all. So the Overton window moves. And so what you find within your lifetime, and some of the people who I assume are watching tonight, maybe you started getting really involved with politics when Donald Trump got elected. And it was so obscene and grotesque that you're like, I might need to pay attention to this. You have now been paying attention to politics long enough to notice that the Overton window shifts. And this whole idea goes back to the concept that reality is malleable. Like, there's not just a regular sort of baseline reality. It moves, it shifts, it can do all kinds of different things. And in this moment, for instance, a lot of us are remembering what the Overton window was like in 2001, 2002, and 2003, which is where we saw this jingoism, right? This chauvinism, this American idea of revenge and going over to the Middle East and killing people. We're being reminded of that now. That Overton window is moved. And the Overton window can continue to move, which is unfortunately what a lot of people don't want to accept. They want to laugh and they want to say, you're being a reactionary, you're being hysterical. And meanwhile, it just continues to get worse and worse and worse. Everything that we talk about ends up coming to pass in some way, shape, or form, while people roll their eyes and they're like, that's ridiculous, that's overreacting. And it's simply because when you actually pay attention to this stuff, you will notice that America is on an extremist rightward trajectory. It's a lot. It's a lot. But again, I have hope. I do. And I think that we're going to go through a lot of trials. I think we're going to suffer. I think we're going to take some licks, and we certainly are right now. No generation goes without something, right? They all get tried. They all have some sort of a problem. They all have some sort of a crisis, or two or three. And what we have inherited, what we are living in, is a massive, massive existential crisis. It's political, it's social, it's economic, it's personal. And we got a lot. We got to deal with. Kim D said, Republicans are whining about inflation, whining about ending war. It's like winning the lottery for them. Absolutely, it is. This moment that we're in right now is sort of the perfect situation for the Republican Party. And the reason that I say that is because there is nothing that our media likes more than going after a president after a certain period of time, after that honeymoon is over. With Joe Biden, they're reveling in this moment, and they're reveling in it for multiple reasons. One, and I talked about this a couple of weeks ago on here and also on the podcast, which is that our media is relentlessly pro-militaristic. They love the idea of our military getting out there and bombing places and overthrowing places and showing the glory of America through our brute force. Part of this has to do with not just the idea of American exceptionalism, and not just the fact that the military goes over and secures resources and territory that these people rely on. But there's also the fact that most of them have spent time being embedded with them over in war, which is one of the smartest things that our military ever did. They figured out post-Vietnam that in order to keep reporters from seeing things that they shouldn't see and or reporting, negative things about our military, that if you take reporters and embed them with our military, then they're going to worship them. They're going to feel like they're, part of that band of brothers. And so a lot of the people who are now hosting shows or are in these big influential positions, they cut their teeth being embedded with the military or reporting on war. Also, our media consistently is always trying to prove to Republicans and the right wing that they're really not that liberal, right? They're not just weak liberals. They'll support the military. They'll salute the flag. On top of that, it's them trying to prove that they're not actually biased. And in this case, they have been just salivating over the idea that they can go over and they can, black Biden's eye, to use a phrase. In this case, the media is so far removed from public opinion, but they're actually helping the Republican Party, which is what they always inevitably do. In the case of with January 6th, within, Trump circles, all of that, they've continually just rehabilitated these people and given them platforms and given them tons of airtime. And so what is happening right now is that this moment of crisis for Biden, which it's not actually. If you want to look at it, Biden's actually handled himself pretty well. And I say this all the time. I'm not a Biden apologist. I have a lot of problems with Biden. And I actually think that it's important that we remember that Joe Biden was on the side that wanted these wars, that wanted to be a part of all of this. And, I say it all the time on the podcast. Joe Biden was partially the architect of the crime bill that led to mass incarceration. There are all kinds of things that you can ding Joe Biden for. In this case, he ended a 20-year war that we had failed on. And we were continuing to sacrifice American lives and taking our money and our influence and just wasting it on this thing that was going to collapse the moment that we pulled out. It was a mirage. I said it, I've been saying it a lot recently. It's like one of those movie lots where it looks like a building, but it's just a two-dimensional thing. In this case, the Republican Party is having a field day because the media wants people to come on and criticize Joe Biden for doing the right thing and pulling us out of the war. And is it ugly? Absolutely. You better bet your ass it's ugly. But of course it's ugly. This is what empire does. Empire is never not ugly. Like any imperial power throughout history, they go into a place, they try and conquer it, they take their resources, inevitably they commit war crimes and atrocities. They have all of these civil wars and insurrections. They have all kinds of problems, and then before they leave, there's inevitably a crisis. And then there's an existential crisis about, are we still an empire or are we still strong? This is 100% what happens with every empire. It's ugly. It's awful. This is why we shouldn't have empires. This is why imperialism is so disgusting. It's awful. So yeah, it's tragic. I think it's awful what's been going on. I think it's terrible to hear that people are dying and that people are being oppressed or people are undergoing cruelty. But if I had to choose, I would choose never to have gone on in the first place. Period. And that's the honest to God truth. But Republicans are having a field day. And nobody's talking about January 6th. Nobody's talking about Trump. Nobody's talking about authoritarianism. Nobody's talking about voting rights. Nobody's talking about any of the stuff that the Republican Party has all of their hands dirty with. So this is what I keep saying. And by the way, Kyle asked, where's this whole Afghanistan thing going? So this is the problem. And I keep saying this, and this is, take it as a warning, take it as a prognostication, whatever you want. All of this is heading in the direction of the Republican Party pushing militarism, jingoism, and empire redemption. That's where all of this is going, because America has an appetite for that. Like we are still just absolutely filthy with the forever wars. I mean, again, I talk about this all the time. Like, go to the store in the South or wherever you are. I assume that you have these people who are dressed in all of these like mercenary clothes, and they've got all the stuff on their trucks and their cars and their Humvees and all of this. They are obsessed with militarism and the idea of being the imperial power. That is one of those things that they can strike a chord, and the media falls for it. The media loves that shit, because if they called it out, if they questioned it, well, I mean, they might seem soft or they might seem anti-military. You know what? You know how I feel like you support the military? You don't send them over to die in unnecessary wars. You don't send a bunch of poor people, a bunch of people of color, a bunch of people who can't afford to go to college or do anything else. You don't send them over to die for the interest of capitalists and the wealthy class. That's where this thing is going. And that's what's worrisome. And I keep saying this, and I'll bring it up in every live stream, and I'll bring it up in every podcast, because people need to understand it, which is that the media didn't like Trump because he wasn't polished. The media didn't like Trump because he didn't say the things a president should say. If the Republican Party can find anybody who is disciplined and will salute the flag and not embarrass himself, That's a problem. Which is why we have to remember that the people who are doing this, whether it's the media, whether it's journalists, whether it's politicians, we have to remember that they are not perfect. They're not on our side. They have people in these networks and in these newspapers and these magazines. Some of them know what's up. Some of them don't know their ass from a hole in the ground. And you have to understand that a lot of them are pushing an agenda that is going to make sure that your kids or the kids that you know are going to go into a useless war of exploitation and cruelty and empire. So where's this whole Afghanistan thing going? It's going to be ugly. There's going to be more terrorist attacks because ISIS-K, whatever you want to call them, they're not going to stop. This is how they get recruits. This is how they get attention. This is how they gain power, by doing all of these things. And the longer we're there, the more that these attacks are going to happen. We need to get everybody out and we need to leave. We don't need to send more troops. We don't need to have whatever. We need to get out. And I have to tell you, things in Afghanistan are not going to be great. There's probably going to be a civil war type situation. There's probably going to be human cruelty. I hate that we created the situation where this would happen. But I think that's where this is going. And I think within the right, you're going to see a pro-military, pro-empire push. Because why wouldn't they? That's the only thing that has been able to ding Joe Biden. Why wouldn't they do more of that? Why wouldn't they focus on that? That's what their base wants. Their base wants chauvinism. Their base wants this masculine overcompensation and this threat of violence and American hegemony. Why wouldn't they do it? It's totally predictable, unfortunately. But if we know that, and if we know where this comes from, if we know how this works, we can reject it. Because what we're being fed every single day, and this is important, what we're being fed every single day is that we get fed two options, which is you're either a Democrat or you're a Republican, and that's the end of it. You're either on this side or you're on that side. And in this case, you always get told, well, CNN and MSNBC, they're leftist, and so you got to listen to what they have to say. They are pushing pro-empire ideas. They are pushing forever wars. They're pushing the idea of American exceptionalism. In this case, this is a situation where we need to recognize that we are always on the precipice of going into another war and being in another imperial quagmire, particularly now that we have suffered this humiliation and this defeat. They're going to want it more. And we are entering a period of time, and this is really important too. We are in this really important time where the economy and politics and all this stuff with the climate change situation, we are looking at a point where all of this stuff could potentially come to a head, particularly with international alliances and all these groupings, the far right all around the world, anti-liberal democracy taking hold in all these places. It's a tinderbox. It's an absolute tinderbox right now. Hackashawn, I have not read Ackerman's book. I'm excited to read that here pretty soon. I've been doing research on my book, but Ackerman's book is on my bookshelf. I want to get him on the podcast here sometime soon. I think he's Spencer Ackerman's a really interesting guy who's covered the Forever Wars, but also has sort of changed and evolved the way he looks at all of that. I would like to talk to him. Lee, when we started, Lee asked if I would talk about ivermectin. Is that how you pronounce it? Ivermectin? Terrible. Absolutely terrible that there are people who are so afraid of admitting that they were wrong about coronavirus that they're willing to go out and drink horse and sheep dewormer. I know these people. I grew up with these people. I care about these people. It breaks my heart. It breaks my heart. It really, truly does. And I tweeted this last night. Like, they're obviously so afraid of coronavirus, but they're so stuck within their political identity. that they aren't able to start to reckon with the possibility that maybe experts know what they're talking about. They're more willing to drink poison. They're more willing to drink poison and die than they are to admit that they're wrong. And I want to say with this that this is one of the big things that we have to deal with, is that we have to deal with our own identities, what we believe, how those things are influenced. We're going to talk more about that with another question in a second, but it just breaks my heart. It just absolutely breaks my heart. And it makes me think about not just all the people who are dying tragically and unnecessarily, but their kids that they're leaving behind, their family that they're leaving behind, the tragedy. It's so awful. It's awful. Katie says, how do we as a nation cope with approaching 1 million deaths with little mourning? Hell of a question. I have to tell you that and this is what I've been doing. Every morning, I sit down with my coffee when I'm getting ready to do my work, and I go and I look at the number dead. I look at the number of people who died the day before, which, by the way, we're well over 1,000 every single day now. We're not talking about that because we got to talk about Afghanistan. We got to talk about everything else. We're over 1,000 every single day. And what I do to try and remember that is I go and I look at the number, and I look at the total number, and then I just think about it for a while. And I envision the total number. It helped for me to start picturing the University of Michigan plays in what's called the Big House, which is about 100,000 people. And I just think about how many of that stadium, how it would look. And it breaks my heart. But I also think having your heart broken is the correct response. And I think living delusionally and not thinking about human suffering and pretending like it's not happening is just as bad, if not worse, as that as that feeling. It's rough. Alfonso says, very simple, why is the freaking vaccine, why have they become so politicized? I think a lot about this, and we've completely forgotten, because now at this point, Trump's presidency didn't even happen. Like, why would you even talk about Donald Trump? It's so bizarre, isn't it? And to be honest, I think that was the moment where this thing got off the track. Like, I think the Republican Party was always going to go after experts and scientists because they naturally have done that, because there's been a war against technocrats, because they don't want them in control of the government, obviously. Also, it is, everything with climate change. They've gone after science and the academy and experts in order to undermine all of that. But with Trump, I really do think that Donald Trump simply didn't want numbers. He felt so bad about the idea that people would be dying on his watch, like a scoreboard, which is the only way I think that Donald Trump could imagine things, was that, everybody who died was going to look bad for him. He didn't care about human tragedy. He didn't care about, human beings dying early and unnecessarily. What Donald Trump was worried about was how many people would die, how bad it would make him look, and how it would affect his reelection. And so he made a judgment. And I think this goes back to, like, with the ship, the cruise ship. If you remember that, there was a cruise ship that was just filled with COVID people, and he didn't want it to land because he didn't want the numbers. And so Trump, in his magical reality, his positive thinking brain, which is a big part of Donald Trump, is he couldn't believe anything that reflected negatively on him or made him feel bad or made him look bad. And so I think Trump pushed this COVID disinformation simply to try and save his own ass. And so the Republican wing, the right wing, went right along with it. But also, the other reason that all of this has happened is because they needed people to go to work. They needed their economy and their exploitation to continue. They didn't want the economy to shut down because, again, and I talk about this all the time on this live stream and on the podcast, capitalism cannot think further than today or the quarter that it's in. In all of this, it would have behooved all of these people to have shut down the country and to have taken a quick financial hit so that it wouldn't be a larger hit going forward. That would have been better for everybody. But capitalism does not allow long-term planning. It's impossible. You have to always profit. You have to always grow. I have to get it now. It's the marshmallow test, right? Seeing if somebody can delay their gratification for later. Capitalism will not allow it. Capitalism demands that you eat the marshmallow now. It doesn't matter if you get 2 marshmallows later. In this case, this was all about power and wealth. That's all that this was about from the very beginning. They chose their path and they went down it. It's the exact same thing that happens with every other issue. There could be something that happens tonight, just some random incident, right? We've seen this with Potato Head. We've seen this with Dr. Seuss. We've seen it with the freaking Olympics. Something could happen tonight and the right wing will automatically decide what their opinion is of it. And then they'll go down that road and they'll be on that road for the rest of their lives. It's a decision, a political decision. The whole point is that we are watching hundreds of thousands, if not a million people die unnecessarily for something that we should have taken care of. It is really, really, really hard to wrap your head around how needless and awful and tragic and useless all of this has been. Awful. Daniel, how many right-wing radio hosts, sheriff's deputies, etc. have to succumb to COVID before the anti-vax crowd will begin to question what they've been told? Is there a limit to the needless death they'll witness? No, there's not. It would almost be funny if it wasn't terrible, the number of people who undoubtedly lost their loved ones like this. It's one right-wing host after another. And it's like, how many of these people are there out in the world? People who go to work, we talk about this on the podcast all the time, right? It's somebody who goes in and it's their job to go in and say this bullshit on the air. And it hurts people. It kills people. It literally kills people. And they make this decision based on how their demographic wants it or how their niche wants it or how they're going to get more advertisers, more listeners, all this stuff. And it's an economic decision. Meanwhile, a bunch of them have gotten vaccinated. And the people like Tucker Carlson and even Trump and Hannity, those people are all vaccinated. They all know this is real. In this case, you have a lot of the lower tier people, the regional people, those Hannity wannabe people who would like slit their families' throats in order to get a primetime slot on Fox News. They're downstream. They don't necessarily understand what's going on. They don't necessarily believe reality in the same way that Hannity and Tucker and all these other people do. They're just downstream. They're not going to deal with it. And their listeners aren't going to deal with it. They've already come up with all kinds of conspiracy theories. I don't know if you've all seen this, but it's stuff where the left and vaccination people in the New World Order, they're going in and assassinating these people and poisoning them. And they're just going to continue to create conspiracy theories that are going to square the circle of the reality that they believe in. They're not coming around. They're not coming around. I have talked to a few people who have changed their mind or know people who have changed their mind about COVID. In most cases, these are people who were sort of on the fence to begin with, or they had an economic reason that they needed to do it. Maybe their job made them do it, or maybe their family begged them to do it, and so they did it there. Some of the people that I have seen are people who they lost somebody tragically. So occasionally some people come around, but it's really, really rough. It's really rough. Janelle, do you think we'll ever get to the other side of this pandemic? I ask because the politicization of masks and vaccines has me worried that we'll be seeing more people getting sick and dying when it's also preventable. I think if I had to guess in this case, that we will get to the other side of this pandemic. I think it's going to take a hell of a lot longer because of the political situation that's going on here, and also the economic situation, and also because our healthcare system is just absolutely crumbling by the day. I think we will reach a point, and we'll probably end up getting a bunch of boosters. We'll probably deal with this for another couple of years, would be my guess. People are saying the Spanish flu took 2 to 3 years, something like that. 3 years. I would have to bet that this one goes 4 or 5. I think it has to be longer simply because of the political circumstances and the disinformation of the social media age. I think we're going to deal with it for a while. The problem is going to be whether or not we're able to take political power to the point where we can take actual steps to make it better and to actually treat people with human dignity and make sure that they're safe and that we're not just sacrificing people left and right. So I think we are going to get to the other side. But I will also say that this is exhausting. I'm exhausted. I assume that you're exhausted. We have to take joy where we find it, because this thing will grind us down. It will absolutely grind us down. And in the case of this political crisis and the ecological crisis that we're dealing with, we have to find joy where we can find it. We have to find moments of respite where we can find it. But yeah, that's my guess. I think we'll get out from underneath this thing, but I think it'll go on for way too long because of a lot of what's going on. Jack, I'm beginning to view the pandemic as a forever war, perhaps even a forever world war. Capitalism has already absorbed COVID, and those markets are here to stay. Do you believe that ending the pandemic is a false narrative? I think this is one of those situations where, going back to what we were saying a second ago, I think that we're going to see this happen for a while. But I also do believe that economically we're going to reach a point where things have to get better. Things have to somehow or another relieve themselves, because this thing is taking a chunk out of our economy. It's hurting our economy. It's helping some people, obviously, with the technologies that are side effects of this, whether it's the medicine or the communication technologies and all of that. But eventually, and it's just like climate change, and I say this all the time too, there comes a point in climate change where even the oil companies have to make the decision that there's more money and more power to be had in fighting climate change than there is in creating climate change. We're at that moment now. It's starting to tip a little bit. When you start seeing the corporations, particularly energy companies, automobile companies, you name it, when they start dealing with crisis, it's not because they had a moment of conscience. It's not because they woke up in the middle of the night and decided that's what's right to do. It's because they realized that there's more money in the solution than there is to keep it going. In this case, I have to imagine that this will be on a smaller scale, that eventually there will be an economic incentive for people to fight, eradicate, and or move beyond this pandemic than there is to continue to paper over it or put Band-Aids over it. That's the hope, and I'll knock on wood there. Hopefully that's the case. Lincoln on Cyrus Project, your take on U.S. Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Scheller and whether or not the next coup attempt might be a military one. So, Scheller, of course, is the guy who came out and said that Biden has screwed up Afghanistan, came out, said that there's, this problem with Afghanistan and the betrayal of the army or whatever. The problem is that there are a lot of people in the military and also within law enforcement who are white supremacists, white radicals, and extremists and terrorists. That is the case. I am less worried about the military carrying out a coup than veterans. of the military or veterans of law enforcement, people who are engaged in either the military and or law enforcement who are working with outside groups, paramilitary groups, militias, separatists, terrorist cells. I'm more worried about that. I'm more worried about some sort of a situation where we have a spontaneous eruption of violence that leads to a crackdown, which is how a lot of these things occur. I'm also worried, unfortunately, going back to what I was saying earlier about the Afghanistan thing and the right, I am more worried about a empire redeeming movement, and that for sure could lead to something that could be a little bit more widespread. But I will say that the way that the military dealt with Donald Trump gave me hope that there are people who see the threat and aren't going to deal with it, particularly with leadership. But who knows what happens when you have a lot of the forever war veterans who start moving up into leadership positions? Who knows what that ends up looking like? And to be honest, I think American empire and the forever wars are going to have consequences that we can't even begin to wrap our heads around until it happens. Like people who are going to be calling again for the renewal of empire and what that ends up looking like. I mean, that is that's a worrisome thing. It's a really worrisome thing. Will asked Jim Jordan admitting his calls with Trump on January 6th. Does prosecution become more likely? I don't know. I think that the commission is going to investigate stuff. I think they'll probably end up finding somebody and sort of like putting some pressure on them. But I wouldn't bet on it being Jim Jordan. I wouldn't bet on it being Trump either. I think the Democratic Party is really afraid of holding those people accountable and what that looks like and what it turns into. Todd says Hungary is the modern coup model. Oligarchy, not military takeovers. I completely agree. I think there's a reason why the right wing has started to embrace Hungary the way that they have. I think that Orbanism is exactly what they want. It's exactly the road that they want to go down. And there's a reason why they've been advertising it and talking about it left and right. I do. Bill says, I read your Substack about politics being a product, and I was uncomfortable with it until I sat and really thought about how true it was and how I've never really reckoned with the choices I make and how I present myself. I guess my question is, how in the hell do I keep this in mind? Because it seems exhausting, but also necessary. Yeah, this is a big thing, maybe one of the biggest things, and what I was talking about earlier, which is, and I try and communicate this. Okay, real fast before I answer this question, Lacey, yeah, Orbanism is Viktor Orban and the right-wing group in Hungary basically took over using what we would consider Trumpist tactics, basically turned Hungary into a one-party state, took over the government, took over all of society, schools, the public sphere, the media, all of that, and created an illiberal democracy that supposedly protects Western civilization, because there is a crisis of Western civilization. So that's what Orbanism is. So this is something that I try and communicate a lot. So I'll give it another swing, and hopefully again that I'm able to bring this out in the right way. I wrote about this on Substack. If you haven't, it's over at jaredyatessexton.substack.com. A lot of what we do in politics and a lot of the way that we traffic in politics is based on a consumer model. Consumerism came along and basically psychologically manipulated us into buying a bunch of products that we don't need, but manipulated us via psychological fears and appeals. If you don't buy this, people are going to think you're lame. Nobody's going to talk to you. You'll never be able to procreate. People are going to do whatever. And so in a way, we have come to a point where we are so far removed from the political process, and we feel so alienated from how politics and economics work, that in a lot of ways, our politics are more about expressing who we are and what we would be if we were able to have power. In this way, the people that we vote for, the people we support, they're turned into products, right? So, like, if you supported like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, well, you can buy products that show people that you support Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Now, on the left, this does happen, and it simplifies politics to the point where people aren't engaging in actual organization and or reform and or populism. But on the right, with Trumpism, with fascism, with militarism, it is just it's 15 to 100 times worse, because that's all it's about. The Republican Party and Trump have no actual policies outside of punishing people that they don't agree with, or people that they think are enemies. Meanwhile, they'll tell you this is about liberty or freedom, but what it actually is that it's telling people, oh, this is what you believe in, right? It's the American way, or whatever it is Trump tells them, whatever bullshit he's spewing. And meanwhile, it's actually just about blatant corruption. It's about illiberal democracy. It's about selling off government to the highest bidder, right? Or giving tax cuts to the wealthiest people. So what you actually see in a lot of ways is you see people on the right and within Trumpist circles who begin to express who they want to be, that they're strong, they're powerful, they don't have emotions, they don't sweat the small stuff, all of those types of things. And meanwhile, they're totally removed from the political process. Like, they vote for these people, but these people are actually just taking care of themselves and their wealthy and powerful friends. But in the way that they do it, they're able to express who they want to be, because consumerism and capitalism together make us want to be a different version of ourselves, where if we just buy the right shirt, if we buy the right car, if we buy the right drink, if we carry ourselves in the right way, we'll become the people that we want to be as opposed to who we actually are. Now, the question is, how do you continue to think about that? How do you continue to be aware of that? And it's exhausting. It's absolutely exhausting. You're absolutely right, Bill. It's tiring. But there's no other choice. If we want to make a difference politically, if we want society to feel better, if we want our actual lives to do something besides where they're at now, we have to understand who we are and why we do the things that we do. And none of us are immune to this. Capitalism has merged with psychology and some of the most amazing technology you could ever imagine, to the point where we are manipulated by things that we would never even imagine. So we have to take stock of ourselves. We have to rely on self-introspection and self-reflection. It's really, really hard, but we have to do it. We absolutely have to do it, because the alternative is terrifying. We cannot go down that Trumpist right-wing idea where all of our stuff is just an expression of who we want to be while we're overcompensating for the things that we're insecure about, right? We don't need to buy our way into a different reality. We can make a different reality. We can live a different reality. We can be different people. We can be better people. It's really, really hard, but it's necessary. Laura, not a political question per se, but one that may be about things that help you cope with frustration and stress. Are you reading or writing anything for pleasure right now? So I am absolutely knee deep in the new book. So right now I've been spending my time reading about World War I and its causes and everything around it. I've been finding some really disturbing stuff about proto-fascism that illuminates a lot of things. I'm really proud of the book so far. I'm really proud of what it's doing, and it's taking up most of my time. I think in a way that most of my reading and focusing on reading and writing has gone towards this project. But I will say I just finished an outline for a novel that I want to read, or I want to write years from now when I'm not on this project. I have a couple of ideas that I can't wait to work on. So one of the things that I have been doing is sort of keeping track of the ideas and my energies. I've made a list of books that I'm going to read the moment that I turn in my final project, because you kind of got to wind down and sort of take care of yourself once you're done with these big giant projects. So, yeah, I just read Sleepwalkers, actually. Somebody asked, Christopher Clark, that's a hell of a book. Oh, we're almost to an hour here. So let's go ahead and count down. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Cheers, everyone. Thank you for being here. You're wonderful. Always enjoy doing these. I really, truly do. I always enjoy doing these. And then I get on here and I don't want to stop, which feels bad, because I don't want you to have to like sit here and hang out with me for like 2 hours. One of these days I'll do like a charity stream or something, where I just go for a long time and I just rant about some stuff, which is basically what I do on here. But I'm really, really glad. I'm really glad that we do this. I hope you enjoy it as well. I hope you find information from this. I hope you find hope from this. I hope this helps illuminate things. This is, really appreciate you all. This is very, very nice. I'm trying to figure out, I want to start doing some more regular live streams, and not necessarily just always on Sundays, but I want to start doing some more live streams. The problem is that work plus also the book has done that, right? I'm able to do the podcast twice a week and do some interviews in between there, and then of course do this every other week. But man, the book is so much work. Oh man, it kicks my ass sometimes. I'm trying really, really hard to keep going with that. People keep telling me to get on TikTok. People keep telling me to get on TikTok, which is nice, but I don't know what I would do on TikTok. I feel like too much of a square to get on TikTok. I feel like that's where the cool kids hang out. I don't know. Oh, Todd says fascism, neo-fascism, proto-fascism, authoritarianism, totalitarianism. So proto-fascism is the stuff that is sort of a precursor of fascism. So like, you can do Cromwell in England, who took over the country and said, I am now the instrument of God. You can, of course, go to Napoleon, who dissolved the revolutionary government and took over all communications and all reality. Right now, I'm looking at Action Francois, which is a turn of the 20th century French right, anti-Semitic, violent movement with a lot of Proud Boy elements that are really, really disgusting and awful. So proto-fascism is stuff that leads the way to eventual fascism. Fascism is, of course, when you have this nationalistic, conspiracy theory-driven might makes right. Liberal democracy is the problem, but liberal democracy is also a tool of the Jewish conspiracy. All that stuff. So you need a dictator, obviously, to run things. Neo-fascism is people trying to revive the idea of fascism and also rewind the clock past liberal democracy and reach the point of dictatorships and anti-democracy. There is a lot of that stuff. Groggy Bones. Hi, Jared. Hi, Groggy. What are your thoughts about copies of the Dominion voting system software being distributed this month at the Mike Lindell organized event in South Dakota, and the release of the software giving a dry run for hackers to potentially find vulnerabilities that they could exploit? First and foremost, what a shit show the Mike Lindell conference was. Even his experts told him that he was wrong and he didn't understand what he was talking about. Second thing about that is that, and I told everybody that this was going to happen. I told everybody that this was going to happen the moment that this stolen election bullshit was starting, which is that they were going to get their hands on the computers and software and figure out how to hack it. That's 100% where this is going. It's projection. It's always about projection. And the point now is to steal the elections. It's to say, oh, the elections are being stolen. And so then you need to steal them. It's legitimizing the preemptive violence or the preemptive subversion of democracy. In this case, no, they're absolutely getting ready to overthrow elections. And I guarantee, man, 2024 is going to be such a mess. We'll probably have armed people intimidating people at the polls. We'll probably have mass disenfranchisement efforts. And then undoubtedly, we're going to have hacking attempts, people trying to steal the election on the right. It's going to be an absolute shit show. And by the way, if you made me right now pick who is going to be in this election, I don't know that I could do it. I think if I had to put money on it right now, I would say it's Joe Biden versus Ron DeSantis, but I don't know. No, eventually, hopefully, sometime later in our lives, we'll actually get our voting rights taken care of. But that's going to happen, like at some point where we start to take all these things seriously, which is going to take time. It's going to take time. And no, it's not really truly possible to out-organize these people with their bad faith techniques. My hope is that at some point it won't take that. At some point we'll have a level playing field, but that's going to take a while. Epiphonia, Destroyer, on a scale of 1 to 10, how anxious are you about the coming months? A lot seems to be happening at once. COVID, vaccine mandates, school responses to COVID, and vaccine/mask, Afghanistan, the settling in amongst Trump supporters that Trump isn't going to be reinstated, etc. seems bad. 1 to 10? Man, that's hard. I think if I said 10, that means that I'm pretty certain that something's going to happen that's bad. 10. I said this before, the situation, the bomber on Capitol Hill, we're going to see more terrorist attacks, more domestic terrorism. Unfortunately, we'll probably see that. We'll probably see somebody who is just absolutely soaking in these conspiracy theories, and the whole thing with like the pandemic is the temperature's just growing and growing and growing, and in this case, with everything from Afghanistan to these ideas that the vaccine mandates are basically Nazi Germany, right? I could absolutely see that turning into some violent separatist far right thing for sure. So 10. I'm scale 1 to 10. I'm 10. I think it's almost definite at this point that something like that is going to happen. Unfortunately, the question is how bad it will be and whether or not we'll learn from it, which isn't always a given in this country. That's what's scary, is that we don't learn from the problems. We don't learn from our missteps. We don't learn from what has happened and what's going on. We refuse to learn. It is part of American exceptionalism or the American identity. We refuse to learn from these things. Sarah, did you see the Facebook virtual reality bullshit? I feel like this is the stuff you were talking about a couple of months ago with the idea that the rich want us in the digital space. Do you think it's going to happen? That's what they're trying to do. I had somebody email me. I wrote on Substack. I can't remember the name of it. It's like the Digital Frontier or something like that. That's JaredYatesSexton.substack.com. I wrote over there that all of the tech companies are trying to push the idea of virtual reality because as things get worse in terrestrial society, COVID, climate change, political crises, economic crises, as all of a sudden life here is not great, and as our political differences make things worse, as all of that stuff happens, they're going to say, hey, you know what, just escape into distraction. Go into virtual reality. Go in this space that is tailored to whatever you want. Live however you want, away from everybody else. Leave the real world to the rest of us. And the whole point of it is that they don't want people voting. They don't want people in the public sphere. They don't want people living in the world. What they want is they want to get beyond us so that they continue resource extraction, exploitation, and doing whatever they want and moving beyond democracy. That is the whole point of what is happening within the tech sector and the wealthy and the powerful. They want to get beyond where we are now. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't enjoy virtual reality. It doesn't mean that you can't enjoy video games or entertainment. The question is whether or not this society or whether or not this existence will continue, or if at some point we're like, you know what, this is so bad and so terrible, just leave me alone, let me go to my digital fantasy. And of course, there will be inequality there. There will only be a limited number of people who are able to go and experience that. It will be a bourgeois problem, right? The poor, people of color, the discriminated against communities are not going to be able to live within that reality. And on top of that, it's going to be a shit reality. They're not going to spend much money on it. They'll give you bells and whistles, but that's about it. Everything else is to get you out of the way. Mars, space colonization, virtual reality, the whole point of all of it is to get you out of the world or out of the earth so they can handle things and get you out of the way, which is what the wealthy and the powerful have been up to for centuries now. It just so happens that now they have cooler toys, better technology. Is it Cyberpunk or Blade Runner? Probably neither. My guess is it'll be a combination of those things, but also with like a really shittier VR reality, where people are just like, you know what, it sucks, but it's mine, which is the sad truth. But I want to say, before I move on from this question, we don't have to do this shit. We can reject it. We don't have to take all of this. We can make a better life. We can say, you know what, enough is enough. We're going to have a better life. Inequality is going to cease and desist. This system of exploitation and cruelty has to stop. We are going to live better lives. We can do that. We do not have to accept this bullshit. We do not have to continue down this trajectory. We do not have to accept the future that they tell us is inevitable. True story. We don't have to. We can make a better life. And we have to. We absolutely have to. All right, 3 more. Sarah, bizarre that California wildfires are not being covered as among the many crises facing the Biden administration. Our state is burning. Hello. It's awful, isn't it? And why is it not being talked about? Because there's nothing that people can do about it. Oh, but right, there is actually something we can do about it. We can decide we deserve something better. We can actually address climate catastrophe. We can actually make a difference. We can actually live in a world where we're not having fire fucking tornadoes. You don't have to live in this world. And we know where it's going. Everything that we're dealing with right now, these constant crises, these things that hurt us, that destroy us, that kill us, that are pushing us further and further into authoritarianism. Because I keep telling people, the moment that all of a sudden real estate starts going away, territory starts going away, land starts going away, resources start going away, which they already are. Whew, these political problems that we have, they're only going to get worse. And the cruelty is only going to get worse. The whole point is we can do better and we have to do better. But the fact that these things aren't getting talked about is because they don't want you to actually change things. They don't want you to understand that we are at the precipice of something and we have to change the way that we live. We got to do better. We got to do better. We absolutely have to do better. Liberty for all. Hoping this makes sense. Do you think Trump is done? And if so, what happens to his kids? Oh, fuck his kids. That's what I have to say. Just they can go to hell. His kids can go to hell. And if so, what happens to his kids? And also, I'm still having trouble wrapping my head around a world where Trump is out of power, but things also get worse. Again, Trump was a symptom. He wasn't the disease. Any world in which Donald Trump could become president of the United States is a world in which things are seriously wrong. Capitalism and elitism and exploitation have reached a point where things have gotten so bad that somebody like Donald Trump could become president. The truth is that if we're not careful, whatever comes next is much worse than Donald Trump. It's someone with discipline and intelligence and principles. He was an absolute charlatan. He was an absolute buffoon, but he was able to use our societal and political and economic rot against us. So maybe his kids are going to run for Senate at some point. I assume Ivanka is at some party tonight, and I assume liberals are like, I never thought you were that bad or whatever. But no, the world is worse off because Donald Trump was able to become president, but it was also a symptom of something else. The fear at this point is that someone will follow up, take the mantle of Trumpism, and will know what they're doing, and will have the support of our media and political and elitist class. That's the frightening thing. And there are a few candidates at this point who can take over that position and can do a lot of damage with it. So yeah, it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. Finally, Dr. Manhattan, question, are there any countries worth moving to? I keep saying this. The problems that we are dealing with are worldwide. Right now, what we're dealing with is particularly American because of the different types of ideas that we have about what America is and who Americans are. It's exacerbated here because we are the main empire, the strongest contender. And so we are dealing with this stuff and seeing it up close and personal. The problem is that this right-wing authoritarianism, white extremism is around the world. And not only is it around the world, I keep trying to tell people this, and I don't mean this, like this isn't reactionary, this isn't conspiracy theory, this is 100% true. Right-wing white extremism is an international movement. They talk to each other, they compare notes, they take care of one another. This is a thing that is growing. And what we have to do is we have to recognize what it is, and we have to fight this thing where we are. And I know that that's hard, and I know that a lot of us wish that we could just pick up stake and go somewhere else, but we're here, and we have to fight, and we have to make things better. And as I keep saying, I think we're going to. I do. Going back to the beginning of this talk, I actually think that we're going to win this fight. And I think a large part of it, because again, things are hard and we're dealing with a lot of tragedy and a lot of crises right now. But I think in the midst of all of this that we are waking up. And I think that we are beginning to understand what is happening and what has been happening for generations. All the research I find is that this is just cyclical. It just keeps happening. And if we can learn what that cycle is, if we can learn what these tricks are, what these manipulations are, what this mystification is doing, and what it's trying to make us do, and where it's trying to lead us, if we can understand that, if we can organize, if we can engage in solidarity, if we can rebuild our social connections and our social trust, we can change the world. Because the world is mostly a construct. It's a bunch of things that we agreed on, and it's a bunch of things that we just do. We can do better than this. It isn't hard to do better than this. This is a failed system. If there's anything Afghanistan and the COVID pandemic has taught us, it's that this is a failed system. All the things that we were told that this would do, give up all that money, give up all that power, it'll make the world better, don't worry about it, eventually it'll come back around, you'll benefit from this, you'll get health care, you'll get better education. They lied. It never happened. We have to do better than this, and we're going to do better than this. I truly, honestly believe that. Thank you for coming out tonight. Y'all are awesome. I appreciate you hanging out for I'm getting ready to get up to an hour and a half here. I look forward to this every other week. And I gain so much strength and I gain so much encouragement from you. So I say thank you. I really, truly, truly do. As always, if you want to support what I'm doing, you can become a patron of the Muckrake Podcast over at patreon.com/Muckrake Podcast. You can get an additional episode every week plus additional content. If you want to find my writing, it's at jaredyatessexton.substack.com. I really appreciate the help over there. It's been really good for me. It's been really good for me to have that project and be able to write about that stuff. We'll be back in 2 weeks, unless there's some sort of an emergency or I figure out a time where I can come on here and live stream on a night that's not a Sunday. Y'all are wonderful. Here is to future victories and future weeks that are not like this. Cheers. All right, everybody. Have a good week. Be safe.